The morning my husband's family threw me out, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind of storm that makes a good story. Just gray, cold, relentless drizzle that soaked through my coat before I even reached the end of the driveway. I had 2 bags. One held my work laptop and 3 changes of clothes. The other held everything else I thought I might need. My grandmother's ring, a photo of my mom from 1987, and a folder of documents my sister-in-law had no idea existed. I stood on the sidewalk outside the house I had lived in for 4 years, and I did not cry. I was too tired to cry. I had been too tired for a long time. Let me go back to the beginning because you need to understand what kind of people these were before you can understand what happened next. I married my husband when I was 27. He was warm and funny and attentive in ways that made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, completely safe. His family was loud and close-knit, and they welcomed me with open arms. At least, that is what it looked like from the outside. His mother hugged me at every gathering. His sister always saved me a seat at the table. His brother-in-law told jokes that were just funny enough to make everyone comfortable. It took me almost a year to notice the pattern. The jokes were always at someone's expense. The hugs came with whispered comments about my weight, my job, my apartment, before I moved in. The saved seat was always next to the person nobody else wanted to sit beside. And my husband, my warm, funny, attentive husband, went along with all of it, because he had been going along with all of it his entire life and had stopped noticing it was happening. His sister was the architect of everything. I want to be careful about how I describe her, because I spent a long time telling myself I was imagining it. She was beautiful and charming and the kind of person who made you feel chosen when she turned her attention toward you. She also had a talent, and I mean a real, practiced, deliberate talent, for making things disappear. Opportunities, conversations, invitations that were meant for someone else. I was a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company when we got married. I was good at my job. I had been promoted twice in 3 years, and I was working on a product with a small team that I genuinely believed in. My sister-in-law worked in the same industry, different company, and from the moment she found out what I did, something shifted in her eyes. Something calculated. She started asking questions about my work. At first it seemed like interest. Then it seemed like networking. Then I started getting passed over for things and I could not figure out why. I found out 16 months later, at a birthday dinner for my mother-in-law, when my sister-in-law let something slip that she should not have known. A detail about a project meeting. A name I had mentioned once in passing in my own home. I went cold sitting there at that table with my fork halfway to my mouth. I smiled and said nothing and I filed it away. I started keeping a notebook after that. Nothing dramatic, just dates, quotes, things I noticed. A contractor I had recommended who suddenly went with her company instead. A client introduction that was supposed to come through me and somehow ended up in her hands. A reference I gave that she somehow knew about before the person had even responded to it. It went on for 2 years. The worst part was not what she was doing. The worst part was what it cost me to see it clearly. Because seeing it clearly meant accepting something about my husband that I did not want to accept. He knew. Not every detail maybe. But he knew his sister well enough to know how she operated, and he had chosen, over and over, to say nothing, to smooth things over, to tell me I was being sensitive. The fight that ended everything happened on a Sunday evening in February. I had found something concrete, an email, forwarded without my knowledge, that contained a pitch document I had written. My intellectual property, my work, sent to her company's development team with her name on it. I showed my husband. He looked at it for a long time, then he said, "You don't know she sent it. Maybe it was a mistake." I looked at him across the kitchen counter and I understood that I had been wrong about feeling safe. I had confused his conflict avoidance for gentleness. I had confused his silence for respect. What I had actually married was someone who would always choose the path of least resistance. And I was never going to be less resistance than his family. 3 days later his mother called a family meeting. I was not invited to attend. When my husband came home, he told me that his family had concerns about my behavior, that I had been creating tension, that they thought it would be best if I had some space and moved out temporarily while we figured things out. I asked if he agreed with them. He did not answer right away. That was answer enough. I packed my 2 bags that night. I did not make a scene. I walked out of that house in the February drizzle, and I sat in my car for 45 minutes before I drove to a hotel because I genuinely did not know what to do next. I had given up my apartment when we got married. I had turned down a job offer in another city because I wanted to build a life with him. I had referred clients his sister's way because I thought we were family. I booked the cheapest room the hotel had. I sat on the edge of the bed and I opened my laptop and I looked at the folder I had been building for 2 years. Then, I called an attorney. Here's the part of the story that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. I did not plan what happened next. I had built something, yes. My team and I had been working for 3 years on a software product for healthcare coordination. And we were close, genuinely close, to something that worked. But I had not been thinking about exits or valuations or any of it. I had been thinking about keeping my marriage together and surviving inside a family that was slowly dismantling me from the inside out. The week I left that house, my company's acquisition conversations accelerated. They had been ongoing for several months, but I had kept them quiet, partly out of caution, partly because my husband had a habit of mentioning things to his sister without meaning to. The deal closed 31 days after I checked into that hotel room, $22 million, after taxes and split with my co-founder. I sat in my attorney's office when the number was confirmed, and I did not feel what I expected to feel. I felt very still, very quiet, like the moment before a held breath releases. I did not tell anyone in my husband's family, not immediately. My attorney's first call was to document everything related to the email. The forwarded pitch had been used in a presentation to investors. That was traceable, and what had seemed like a civil matter became something more serious when the paper trail made clear it had crossed into fraud territory. My attorney was thorough and methodical and had seen this specific flavor of family-adjacent theft more times than I would have believed. I also discovered during the legal review process that my sister-in-law had done something similar to 2 other people. One was a former colleague. One was someone who had been close to the family years before I arrived and then quietly disappeared from their lives. That person, it turned out, had filed a complaint that had never gone anywhere because they could not afford to pursue it. I could afford to pursue it now. The legal process took 4 months. I did not contact my husband during that time. I moved into a furnished apartment downtown, hired a therapist I saw every week, and worked. I worked more than I had worked in years because I was finally working without the low-grade noise of that family in the background of everything. My husband called 16 times in the first week. His mother called 7. His sister called twice, which told me everything I needed to know about where her confidence level was. I did not answer any of them. The call I did answer came from a woman named Rosalind. She was the former colleague, the first person my sister-in-law had done this to. She had heard through someone at the company that legal proceedings were underway. Her voice on the phone was careful and a little bit hollow, the way voices get when someone has been dismissed enough times that they have stopped expecting to be believed. I believed her. I told her so, and I asked if she would be willing to talk to my attorney. She said yes before I finished the sentence. I want to tell you about the moment I found out the full scope of what my sister-in-law had built. Not because the specifics matter as much as the feeling of standing there in my attorney's office looking at documents that confirmed I was not crazy. I had not been oversensitive. I had not been imagining it. That thing I had felt in my chest for 2 years, that low, grinding wrongness, was real, and it had a paper trail, and it had witnesses, and it was going to have consequences. That feeling is very hard to describe. It is not triumph, exactly. It is more like solid ground under your feet when you have been walking on ice for so long you forgot what solid felt like. The consequences landed in the order I expected, but harder than I think any of them anticipated. My sister-in-law was terminated from her company when the evidence was disclosed. Companies move quickly when intellectual property theft is documented. They have to, for liability reasons. She had been there for 6 years. She had a title and a team and a reputation she had spent a decade building. All of it was gone within 3 weeks of the disclosure. The civil case took longer, but the settlement came through. I donated the entirety of it to a fund supporting women in tech who cannot afford legal representation when their work is stolen. My brother-in-law, her husband, quietly filed for separation 2 months later. I do not know the details of their private conversations, and I do not need to. My mother-in-law called me one more time. It was a Sunday afternoon and I almost did not pick up. When I did, she told me that I had destroyed her family. Her voice was very controlled, which told me she had rehearsed this call. I let her finish. Then I told her that I had documented everything I experienced in her home for 2 years, and that her daughter had made choices with real consequences, and that I wished them all the health and clarity they needed. I kept my voice even throughout. I hung up and made tea, and sat by my window and watched the street below. My divorce was finalized 8 months after I walked out of that house with my 2 bags. My husband did not contest anything. I think he was relieved in the end that I made it easy. That was his way. He had always preferred things to be easy. I spent a long time being angry about that. Not at him. The anger at him burned out fairly quickly, replaced by something more like sadness. I was angry at the years I had spent trying to make myself smaller and quieter and less threatening so that a family could tolerate me. I was angry that I had let my work suffer. I was angry that I had confused surviving with thriving for such a long time that I had almost forgotten the difference. The therapy helped more than I expected. My therapist had this way of asking questions that made me examine my own patterns, not just theirs. Because the truth is, I had chosen that situation in part because it felt familiar. I had grown up being managed and minimized, and I'd mistaken that management for love, because it was all I knew. Unlearning that took longer than 1 year, and more than one difficult conversation with myself. What helped most was the work. 6 months after the acquisition, my co-founder and I were already developing the next thing. I had resources now that I had never had before. Not just financial, but clarity. A kind of forward momentum that comes when you are no longer spending energy on managing someone else's comfort. We opened a small studio space in March. 8 people. A product in healthcare coordination again. We knew that space, and we knew we had barely scratched what was possible. Within 14 months, we had a Series A. Within 20, we were 40 people and growing in a way that felt, for the first time, entirely mine. I moved into my own home last spring. A house, not an apartment. My first real house, chosen entirely by me, purchased entirely by me, arranged and painted and filled with light in every way I wanted. I have a garden. I am slowly learning how to tend. I have a kitchen where I cook on Sunday mornings with the radio on and nobody to account to and nothing to manage. I have not spoken to my former mother-in-law or sister-in-law since the Sunday phone call. I have not missed it. I expected to feel something more complicated than I do. Guilt, maybe. Or that particular grief of knowing a door is closed. What I actually feel is space. Room. Air. Rosalind and I are still in touch. She joined an advisory board I put together last year, and she is exceptional at it. She is also building something of her own now, a consulting practice, and watching her operate with full confidence in a room is one of the best things I have witnessed in recent years. What was taken from her was real. What she builds afterward is also real. Both things are true at once. I think about the woman who sat on the edge of that hotel bed in February with 2 bags and a laptop and a folder she had spent 2 years building. I think about her a lot, actually. Not with pity, but with something closer to respect. She did not know what was coming. She was exhausted and wet, and she did not understand yet that the thing she thought was her life falling apart was actually just the walls of a room she had needed to leave for years. The rooms we stay in because we are afraid to leave always look smaller from the outside. There is something I want to say directly, because I have seen enough comments and messages from people in similar situations to know this matters. Being the one who absorbs the blame inside a toxic system is not evidence that you deserve it. It is evidence that you are surrounded by people who need someone to absorb it. The moment you stop absorbing it, the moment you simply stop, the system panics. They call it betrayal. They call it selfishness. They call it destroying the family. What it actually is the first honest accounting any of them have had to face. You do not owe your peace to the people who built their comfort on the cost of yours. You do not owe silence to protect a version of events that was never accurate. And you do not owe forgiveness on a timeline that serves them. Forgiveness is a private, personal thing that has nothing to do with what anyone else needs from you, and everything to do with what allows you to move forward. Some people find it. Some people find something better. Not bitterness, but a clean, clear understanding that what happened, happened, and that it is over, and that it has no more power over what comes next. I am still working on the garden. I am still learning to cook things I never learned because I was always trying to adjust my preferences to someone else's kitchen. I am still, sometimes, surprised by the quiet. It's a good quiet, the kind you build deliberately, one small, honest choice at a time. If you've ever been made to feel like the problem in a room designed to make you the problem, your story is real. Your instincts were right. And whatever you are building on the other side of that, I promise, has more room in it than you can see from where you are standing right now. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Like and subscribe if any part of this felt familiar, and join this community, because none of us should have to figure out what comes next alone. Until next time, remember, the life you actually deserve is not built on the approval of the people who never intended to give it to you. It is built on the days you showed up for yourself anyway. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any grand philosophical way, just the quiet, practical kind of thinking you do when you are finally sitting still and have enough distance to see the shape of things clearly. My sister-in-law made a choice every single time she forwarded something that was not hers. Not once, not twice, dozens of times over 2 years. Each choice felt small to her, I imagine. Manageable. Consequence-free. And for a while, it was. That is the thing about taking from people who are too close to you to report it and too invested to walk away. The absence of immediate consequences can look a lot like permission. But every choice accumulates. That is not a spiritual idea, it is just how systems work. When you build something on borrowed material, on other people's labor and ideas and trust, you are also building the architecture of its eventual collapse. My sister-in-law did not lose everything because the universe decided to balance the scales. She lost everything because the evidence existed, because Rosalind had the courage to speak, and because I had spent 2 years being careful when everyone around me assumed I was just anxious. Intelligence, in my experience, is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is about paying attention when every social signal is telling you to stop paying attention. It is about keeping the notebook when keeping the notebook feels paranoid. It is about trusting the thing in your chest that says something is wrong even when the person you love most looks at you and says you are imagining it. I was not imagining it. I never was. And my husband. I want to be honest about him because he was not a villain. He was something harder to be angry at. He was a person who had been so thoroughly trained to keep the peace that he had lost the ability to distinguish between keeping peace and participating in harm. He genuinely believed that staying quiet was neutral. It is not. Silence inside a system that is hurting someone is a vote for the system. That is a hard thing to understand when you love someone, and it is a harder thing to forgive than outright cruelty, because at least cruelty is honest about what it is. What I know now is this: the life I have, the house, the work, the garden I am slowly learning to tend, the Sunday mornings with the radio on, none of it would exist if I had stayed. Not because I needed the money to be free, but because the person I needed to become could not have grown in that environment. Some rooms are too small, some silences are too loud, and sometimes the most important act of intelligence you will ever perform is recognizing which is which and walking out while you still can. Rosalind taught me something just by picking up the phone when I called. She had every reason not to. She had been dismissed and doubted and left without recourse for years before I came along. But she answered, and she showed up, and she built something extraordinary on the other side of what was taken from her. That is what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not a grand gesture, just showing up when it costs you something. If you're in the middle of something that feels like what I described, that low, grinding wrongness you cannot quite name, I want you to know that your instincts are data. Write things down, find one person who will believe you, and do not spend one more year making yourself smaller to fit inside something that was never designed to hold you. The other side is real. I am standing in it,